Welcome to the Elevating Voices in Leadership podcast brought to you in partnership with Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Education. I'm Dr. Gabriela Miramontes, and I will be your host. With me today are my co-hosts, Dr. Maria Brame, Dr. Asia Ghazi, Dr. Sonia Sharifi Fard, Ms. Charlotta Green, and Ms. Sue Ellen Schneider. With us today as our guest is Dr. Heather Backstrom, who is an accomplished executive coach, facilitator, and speaker. She is passionate about cultivating empowered women leaders. Dr. Backstrom is the author of the upcoming women's leadership book, Collaborative Confidence: How Women Leaders Can Activate Self-Awareness, Amplify Their Authentic Talents, and Accelerate Workplace Change. She earned a master's degree in human resources development from Chapman University and an EDD in organizational leadership from Pepperdine GSEP. Welcome, Dr. Backstrom. How are you this afternoon?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here and being part of this community, and excited about the conversation we're about to have.
Oh, we're excited to have you as well. So let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so my book, it's a women's leadership book called Collaborative Confidence, as you just mentioned. That's the main title. And then the subtitle is How Women Leaders Can Activate Self-Awareness, Amplify Their Authentic Talents, and Accelerate Workplace Change. And this idea of collaborative confidence came to me a number of years ago, and it developed into a coaching program and a workshop and now a book. And the idea of collaborative confidence came to me because I've worked with women for so many years, obviously as a woman, but also I've worked with women as an executive coach and facilitator, and previously when I worked in corporate America. And it just struck me one day how I think women really thrive on relationships and being engaged with each other and supporting each other and building community. And from that, this idea of collaborative confidence literally came to me one day out of the blue. I didn't do a focus group or deep research or anything like that. It really was an intuitive spark combined with, professional experience of working with women. And that in addition to women, being in community and relationships and so forth, women also, me included, I'm raising my hand here, we are not always as confident as we really could be, and that's really authentic and true when we get real quiet inside of ourselves. Sometimes we struggle with our confidence. So out of that, this idea of collaborative confidence came up for me as it relates to women.
So tell me more about this collaborative confidence concept. It sounds interesting, so now I'm really curious.
Yeah. So what does it mean, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
What it means is I am responsible for my own confidence, and I'm responsible for helping other women with their confidence. And then vice versa. Other women are responsible for their own confidence, and they're responsible for helping me with my confidence. So there's this reciprocity, this generative, mutual support underpinning that is at the heart and center of what collaborative confidence is. And I think it's also so, at least I hope, that this notion of collaborative confidence, I hope, is particularly beneficial for women as they move up in organizations and they are one of the few women or only women, or when they work in environments where they are the only woman, even in frontline or lower positions. So I hope that this idea of collaborative confidence gives another avenue of support and empowerment for those, especially again for women who are one of the few women in their environment, or they've moved up and they're surrounded by mostly male leaders.
Wonderful. Thank you. So why is this a topic so important now?
Well, I think it's important. Well, it's probably always been important because women, I think, have always been powerful and amazing and strong and spectacular and have go back centuries. And there's so many examples of women who have made such an impact and left such an imprint on this world. But when we look at today, why it's so important around empowering women leaders and that idea of women supporting women, I think we can look at a few different trends, a few different aspects of the workplace today. So when you look at the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, for the longest time, the number of female CEOs for Fortune 500 companies hovered at 8%. For many, many years, it hovered at 8%. And we need to applaud that this year in January, that number went up a whole 2% to 10%. So fabulous. We are making some progress when it comes to the very highest levels of leadership in women. And that's something to celebrate. And it's also a reminder that there is a long road ahead, right? We've made progress. We need to keep making progress. And then when you look at some other information, was this very long study by S&P Global. It went on for 17 years from 2002 to 2019. And what S&P Global's research shows is that when women are at the highest levels of organization, specifically CEO level and CFO level, that profits are increased and that also stock performance tends to be higher than in organizations that don't have women at the highest levels. So I think those are a couple of data points from an organizational standpoint that point us in that direction of the powerfulness and the bottom line results that can come from women, that can come when women are leading at the highest levels. Then you also look at why is this important for women themselves? And I think that speaks toward what I mentioned a moment ago, when you're one of the few women in your organization. Also, I lead some women's circles, and it is very common. And these are women who are leaders in their organization in these circles. They are accomplished. You read their resume, be very impressed with their background. And yet, when I facilitate these circles, it is very common for just about every woman to admit that and to share, to disclose that they don't always feel so confident and they don't always feel so sure of themselves and they second guess. And I think collaborative confidence helps remind women of their powerfulness and their talents and their skills and their expertise. And sometimes all of us need that reminder of who we really, truly are.
I'd love to hear about your book itself a little bit, about how you've structured it. Is it a workbook? Is it, how are you intending for women to interact with your book?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Maria. Yes. So it's written in three sections. Collaborative confidence sits on three pillars of activate, amplify, and accelerate. And the activate section, the activate pillar, is that internal focus where the woman is being introspective about who she is, her strengths, her values, examining that inner critic, which we all have, or that committee, as I'm thinking about myself, that committee and the chatter that committee can make, and focusing our attention to our inner champion instead and our strengths. So that first chapter of activate is about activating that internal side of women and empowering that internal side of women and bringing out stronger and more with greater potency, values, strengths, champion, etc. Then the amplify pillar has more of an external focus. It's about executive presence. It's about spotlighting your contributions. It's about spotlighting the contributions of other women, amplifying other women's influence, their voices, their impact. So it has more of an external focus. And then the accelerate section, or the third pillar, is about the responsibilities that organizations have to support and to leverage women leaders, because that's the system. And women can change and women can adopt new behaviors, new mindsets, they can support each other. And if the system remains the same, then the progress is really it really prohibits the progress that women can make. So the accelerate pillar recognizes that organizations have responsibilities along things like equal pay and burnout and providing sponsorships to women. So that's how the book is broken up in those three pillars: activate, amplify, and accelerate. And then in each chapter, it's explored further through stories and also through ideas of how a woman can further accentuate any one of those pillars.
I love hearing about this. It's really exciting. And I wonder, is your book kind of engineered to be a standalone piece on its own, so a woman can get it, read it, and grow in all of these different ways without interacting with your coaching group? Or is it used in a sort of as a parallel or a piece of your coaching work?
Sure, yeah, it absolutely is written to be a standalone. So a woman can pick up the book and she can start using any one of the pieces of the book. It's also meant to encourage her to engage in collaborative confidence. So throughout the book, I've tried to remind the reader of how she can go out and engage in collaborative confidence and what that looks like and what that means. So the book is a standalone, and yes, the coaching would flesh it out even further. A workshop could flesh it out even further, but a woman could take the book and read it and hopefully gain some really great approaches and insights that she can put to use. And I'll give you, I mentioned amplify a couple of times and the idea of collaborative confidence. So perhaps I can tell a quick story that illustrates this idea of collaborative confidence and how a woman can put it into practice. So this goes back to the Obama White House. And in his first administration, most of his top aides and cabinet members were men. And the women cabinet members, who were just as accomplished, had just as much expertise as the men, they were finding that they were being left out of meetings. When they were in meetings, they were having a hard time getting their voices heard. They were being interrupted. They felt like they were being sidelined. I mean, I think all of us women, me included, can relate to those kinds of things happening in the workplace. So they got together on their own, and the women decided that they would amplify each other's voices. And I will also admit that the second pillar, amplify, this story was the inspiration for the amplify pillar. So they got together and they came up with something that they called amplification. And so what they did in meetings, when, say, Maria, you would get interrupted, I would notice that, and I would say something to bring you back into the conversation. I might say, oh, Maria didn't get a chance to finish her thought, or let's go back to Maria. I think she had something more to say. Or maybe, Maria, you gave an idea, a suggestion, and a few minutes later, a man in the room said the same thing, and all of a sudden, he's the one getting the credit for the idea. I would redirect the conversation and say, well, that sounds like exactly what Maria said a moment ago. So they begin this amplification, as they called it. That's an example of collaborative confidence, about amplifying another woman, bringing her visibility out further, showcasing her voice, her impact, her ideas. So that's one illustration of what collaborative confidence can look like. It can look a lot of different ways. That's just an example of what it can look like in a meeting. And I will say, going back to the White House story, so Obama did notice over time, he did notice that this was happening. And then he ended up changing his own behaviors. He ended up calling on women more in meetings, initiating that. And he started widening the circle of who was included in certain meetings. He started inviting junior aides into certain meetings. So not only did this is kind of goes to the system, right? The system changed. So he changed his behavior, so conversations were more inclusive of all of the voices around the table. And not only that, but the circle of who was invited to the table also expanded.
Thank you for that. That's so interesting, and it makes so much sense. I can see how the whole idea of allyship and is a significant piece of this work and of collaboration. Is this also what you do in your a similar kind of training in your coaching work then?
These ideas definitely do come up in coaching, and I do have an executive coaching program on collaborative confidence specifically, where there's some exercises that the coachee does and some practices that she would do. And I would say that a lot of these things are common experiences that women have. And so throughout my coaching, it almost naturally came, these types of topics almost just naturally came into the conversation because women experience these kinds of situations pretty regularly. And going back, Maria, you mentioned about allyship, and just, when you're sitting in a room and you know that there's somebody else sitting in there who has your best interests at heart, who is watching out for you, who is listening to what you're saying and watching out for when your voice gets interrupted or your idea gets stolen, or you don't maybe even get invited to the meeting or the event or what the decision or whatever it might be. Just knowing that there is somebody else and you're doing the same for her. I mean, the strength and the power of that, I just find to be incredible. And I also find it to be like, I can take a breath because I don't have to shoulder all this myself. I know that there's at least one other person who is, we're doing this together.
Thank you for that, Heather. I have a question though. So there seems to be a layer we haven't talked about prior to this happening in the meeting, right? And it's that level of trust and even confidence amongst women to even get to that point where they feel comfortable and confident enough to support each other in those meetings, in those spaces, for either fear of ridicule or rejection or any of those elements. Can we kind of take the conversation back a little bit to that point? How do you even begin to build that level of confidence, that level of consideration before even being willing to speak up in the meeting itself?
Sure. So build that relationship with another woman. That's before. Yes, exactly. You're absolutely right that there is that groundwork, if you will, the relationship building that happens before a meeting, before an interaction, before an event. And I think, when I look at myself and then I look at other women and women that I've coached, I think it will be different for every person because we're all different individuals, and what we're comfortable with is going to be different than what somebody else is comfortable with. I would say in general, it can begin with you looking around your environment and noticing your level of rapport, your level of comfort with other individuals. And collaborative confidence can absolutely be practiced with another man. It's not exclusive to only women. So if it's another man in your environment, a male colleague that you have a rapport, a relationship with, absolutely you could engage with him around collaborative confidence and share some of the experiences that you've had as a woman leader and ask for his support in addressing those, in dealing with those and navigating those. But going back to your question about what happens before the meeting, I think it is having a discerning look around your environment. Who do you already have a trusting work relationship with? What confidences have you already shared, and have those confidences been honored and held? Who in the environment has been trusting in terms of following through on things they say that they're going to do? You work with the person, they get the work done. So I think it can take that kind of approach where you're evaluating your current relationships and then building from there. Maybe there's a relationship where the footing seems to be strong and solid and the level of trust seems to be there, and then just building that relationship with that person, having interactions with them, testing the waters, with them, and then working your way up to saying, hey, there's this concept called collaborative confidence. It means I'm responsible for my own confidence. I'm responsible for helping other women with theirs. Is this an idea that appeals to you? And wondering if we could try it out together and see how it works.
So I'm curious, have you encountered, or what are the main barriers you think that women face within these environments that they might be able to overcome applying these strategies? Or even what are the main barriers that get in the way?
The main barriers that get in the way of a woman's confidence,
Of,
or
of both either confidence or their ability to engage within these spaces. So more along those lines, if you will.
okay. Well, I think sometimes a woman's expertise can get overlooked. And I'll give you an example of mine not that long ago, where I was on a Zoom call with a group of people. And on the call itself was another colleague of mine who is also has a doctorate. And the entire time during the Zoom call, they referred to him as Dr. fill in his last name, and they referred to me as Heather. And they knew we both had doctorates. It was, it happened to get mentioned even before the meeting and even during the meeting. And it was so fascinating to me that here we are, and he's being called with a title, I'm being called by my first name. And as I mentioned to you before our podcast even started recording, I'm very comfortable being called Heather. So it's not that I felt that's a problem. It was the disparity. That's what stood out to me. And so I think women's contributions and the solutions that they bring or their expertise that they bring is not always noticed. And that is definitely a challenge. And collaborative confidence can be one way to highlight that, to bring out more into the spotlight a woman's talents, expertise, experience, etc.
So may I ask here, 'cause this is really fascinating. I noticed that Dr. Ghazi also has had the same experience. I had an almost identical experience personally, not too terribly long ago. And it was interesting because it was my brother who is a medical doctor, and I have my doctorate, of course, as you do here in education. And the same exact scenario where we were in a bank, and the banker called him Dr. Brahme and called me Maria. And just like, it was just the discrepancy was ridiculous. And I struggled with, should I say something? And I ultimately did not. I don't know that the event really meant so much, but maybe it did. Yeah, I'm really happy that you brought this up, because that's kind of it, depending on the environment, it can be kind of a tricky situation to tiptoe through, or maybe it's fully appropriate to claim your rightful title.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. It is tricky, and there is no right answer. And as you did, it can be reading the environment and deciding, do I speak up and say something, or do I not, based upon my read of the environment. And women walk a tightrope that if we come across too assertive, boy, we're bossy and we're pushy and we're too much, and she's just too much. And if we don't speak up, we can be seen as too passive and soft and weak. Oh, she's not really a leader because, she's too soft. She doesn't speak up. So it's this tightrope that women have to walk. And that's what came up for me, as Maria, as you were telling your story, you were walking a tightrope. And do I not? And if I do, what are the implications that could occur? Maybe everything will be perfectly fine. Maybe things won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you reason your way kind of through that?
So on that one, yeah, I chose not to say anything either. Part of the reason I didn't say anything is we're on Zoom, and I think that sometimes that personal connection, especially bringing up what could be a sticky situation for me anyway, is easier for me to handle in the room with somebody. The other is that the people knew him better than they knew me. They were familiar with me, but they knew him. They had a longer term work relationship with him. So that's another reason why I decided not to say anything.
Yeah. I get that. It's really fascinating. And sometimes I think that those situations, if we're not careful, they can be damaging to us. So it's tricky to handle sort of on a personal level, as well as on a group or public level. Yeah. Really, really fascinating. Yeah, I'm glad you shared that experience.
Hey, Dr. Heather, good to see you again. I'm off camera because I'm running, but
Charlotte.
So to your point about, titles and women, I have found, because, I'm clergy, and so Reverend is my title. I earned it. There were far more women who were less likely to honor calling me Reverend. And I wonder if you kind of speak to that in this whole, collaborative space, where, because we've been shaped by a patriarchal system, and sometimes we are complicit in our own demise, that even when there are strong women who are good models of what it means to be collaborative in our work and to be supportive, there are still some women who do not buy into that, even to their own detriment, but it makes it more difficult for us.
Sure. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I think that just women, people, sometimes we're just going to, not respond in the most humanistic, in inclusive ways. Right. In my book, I really wanted to give I don't know if it's a new narrative, but the narrative of the impact that can come, right, when women really support each other. And so with that, if we look at this notion of women competing with women, I wanted to give a different story for women to consider, because I think that is like an old story. And sure, it probably, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It probably does. I either didn't experience it much in my professional life, or I didn't notice it. It was happening. Maybe I just didn't pick up on it. But in my book, I tell a story about a long distance runner, Shailene Flanagan, and she is a decorated Olympic medal New York City Marathon runner. She is decorated like you would not believe. And in long distance running, it's a solo sport, and it's very competitive. And she went to a training school up in Oregon, and she decided that she wanted to kind of change that. And she created a training school where other women came, and they all trained together, yet they were all competitors, right? They were training and they were learning together, and they were excelling. But yet, when you look on paper, these individuals, these athletes were actual competitors of each other, but they were training collaboratively. They were training together. They were supporting each other. So those are the kinds of stories that I really infused into the book itself, because that's where I want to focus women. I want to focus on the generative, the building, the enduring, the abundance, the more is more. That's where I wanted to point the reader and women toward. And yes, Reverend Green, you earned the Reverend, and you should be applauded for that, and you should be recognized for that, and you should be referred to as that by all people.
Well, thank you. I don't insist upon that. It's one of those things where, again, that where you are, the audience, in the church. Yes, I very much kind of, and partly because when we all started out, I was younger. And so, when you're 30 something, or actually under 30, and the majority of the people in your congregation, remind you that they have children and grandchildren older than you.
Yes, exactly.
That piece of the puzzle. So that's helpful. I wonder if you could speak to cultural nuances when it comes to women and engagement and this space of collaborative support and being generative, because there are different ways in which we show up culturally in support of one another that I don't know that we give enough voice to.
Yeah. So actually, what I would love to, if you would give a little more voice to that, and tell me more about what you mean by those. Are you talking about cultures in terms of like race and ethnicity, or culture in terms of male, female, or tell me a little bit more, and then let's figure this out and talk about this together even.
So I would say, because we poorly use the term race and ethnicity, right? Like that space. Yeah. Human race, lots of cultures, lots of ethnicities. But I'll just give an example from just being in the PhD program. There are a number of, African American females who have decided to collaboratively help each other get through the program, right? That was, it was like, okay, this wasn't an easy task to get through, but we're gonna do this, and we're gonna support each other in this. And sometimes that's not always understood. So it's sometimes, people kind of look at it sideways, or you guys are always together or whatever. But we understood three important things. Number one, we are the ultra minority. Number two, I think you succeed better when you support one another. There's the learning space. There's the space of growth within that. We learn from each other, not just academically, but socially and professionally, right? It's that push pull. But there was a meeting of the minds, and we said, we're going to do this together, right? There are other places where we've recognized that sometimes as African American women, or women who were considered minorities, I don't like the fact that we use that term, because we actually are the majority. Yes. When you talk about women. Exactly. And Black and brown people are the majority when you look at the composition of the world. So but anyways, when you're looking at that, sometimes there's a healthy level of competition, like, we're trying to be our best, but never to the detriment of my sister being able to get where it is that she needs to go. Exactly. And so how are we going to do this? And so there's a level of support that I have not experienced, and I've been in a lot of academic settings and a lot of other spaces, with colleagues who are non-African American. Like there hasn't been this meeting of the mind, let's support each other. Like we may have decided that's what we're going to do, but it was never this intentional, like, this is not an easy journey, and we're going to do this together. Oftentimes it was like, you got an A on that test, so maybe you can help me out. But never this is important enough for us to get through it together. We do not want to leave anyone behind. Beautiful. And not only do we not want to leave anyone behind, we know it's not just about our academics, but it's about our personal, our social lives as well. So how are we supporting each other in that? So that's what I'm saying. Like there's been this cultural dynamic that I often think is missing in dominant culture spaces when it comes to this, the way in which we collaborate, the way in which we support, the way in which we help, that from the outside looking in, may look like we've overstepped boundaries, or that it's not as important, or it seems trivial, but it really isn't.
Yeah. Oh, I love your story, Charlotte. I love the story of how you created with your colleagues this bond as you together are going through this journey of your doctoral studies. And having gone through it as well, getting your doctorate is not an easy journey. And I love that your group have created this bond of support to each other. And it sounds like, to me, like you created collaborative confidence amongst each other. And that you are there to make sure that everybody gets, as you said, no one is left behind, that your commitment to each other is strong isn't even I don't think even a strong enough word, but your commitment to each other endures. And that you know that the power comes from enduring together and going through together and supporting each other and watching out for each other and being there for each other. So I find your story very, very inspirational, and I really appreciate hearing it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering in your next space, if this whole idea of Ubuntu, I am because we are, because you're talking about this collaborative space, you're talking about women supporting one another, and the reality is our existence, whether we want to own it or not, is inextricably linked to everyone else's.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And so I'm wondering what that feels like for you, as you're thinking about you've got this book, but you do coaching and you probably do workshops and some other things. This shifting into asking that deeper question about not just collaboration, but this deeper sense of connection. My humanity matters because your humanity matters.
Yes. Oh, I love that. You're giving me chill, Charlotta. Your humanity matters and my humanity matter. Both. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's if the majority of people in this world had that outlook every day, my humanity matters, your humanity matters, our humanity matters. Oh my goodness, this world would be a different place. And I do think that there is a uniqueness that women bring to that because we are women, because we are the ones that create the procreation, right? Yes, men or sperm or what have you has to be involved. Yes, I mean, unless science takes us some place that we're not aware of right now, but there is that uniqueness of women and how we literally create the world. Yeah, we literally create humanity. Yeah.
Right, and those that don't create for a variety of reasons nurture.
Yes.
And I think that's also important as you're talking about that, right? Like this, you highlighted in the way in which you talk about these different aspects. You talk about amplify, activate, accelerate in some ways in this space. But I think if you're kicking it up another notch, is that part of that collaboration is this space of nurturing, right?
Absolutely. Yes, it is. It is absolutely this place of nurturing yourself, nurturing your talents, your strengths, your values, your inner champion voice, nurturing yourself, and nurturing other women, other people, and amplifying, bringing to the spotlight their humanity, their contributions, the difference they make, the impact they make there, and even the difference they make just by their mere presence.
Yeah. One more question, and I'm going to be quiet and let my
please don't. I love this.
So, one of the things about being in the world of academia, being a coach, being a woman, is that hindsight is always 2020, right? Like we can always look back. And I wonder, now that you're on the other side of this journey of writing the book, having your heart project become a reality. From what I can hear, this was not just, this is a heart project. This wasn't just heart project.
Yes.
What's one thing you wish you had known that would be beneficial as you think about your process and all that you've been doing and the work you've been doing with women that you learned throughout this?
One thing I wish I had known. Yes. I'm thinking there's a number of different things rolling through my head.
I didn't want to like ask you all of them. I just wanted you to be able to do one.
So one thing I learned, think uh, segmenting this to the writing itself. So I'll answer from that angle, and I may have answers that come as I'm marinating and talking at the same time. But segmenting it to the writing. One thing I learned is that writing, it is a solo activity, and of course I knew that. What I didn't tend to myself, speaking of nurturing, is I didn't tend to that part of me that really needed personal connection during this time of writing. And I hunkered down like a lot of women do. We got to get the job done, whatever the job is, hunker down and do the job and just keep going and keep going and keep going. And there were many, 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 many times where it would have been much more healthy to me and felt better and more relaxing if I had given myself a break and relaxed and not worried about the quote unquote homework of needing to write the next paragraph or the next chapter. And if I had stopped and connected with people or connected with activities that I enjoy doing, had I done that more often. So it was that relentlessness that I had, at least throughout much of the writing process, to admit that relentlessness I had, it would have been healthier for me to take my foot off the gas a bit. And healthier, I mean by just not pushing myself. I didn't engage in illicit behavior or anything like that, but it was the self-imposed stress, self-imposed pressure that I put on myself. So in hindsight, it would have felt better to me had I been kinder to myself and nurtured myself more during the writing process and celebrated, even if it's just as simple as dancing in my living room for 5 minutes or taking a 20-minute walk or buying a favorite pastry at a local bakery. Celebrations can come in all versions, all sizes. And the other thing that came to me as I was writing the book is that we all have our own confidence stories, plural, that we all have times and examples and experiences where we feel confident and powerful and we are in our groove and we are in our flow and we just feel good. And there are other times, our confidence stories, where we all feel small and little and unsure and after the fact run the tape in our brain a zillion different times, and if you're like me, beat yourself up while you're running the tape. So everybody has their confidence stories, and I know my confidence stories continue to today and will, I'm sure, continue throughout my whole lifetime.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
This conversation is so inspiring. Thank you for that, Dr. Heather. I do have a question. I'm curious about your advice on something that we have already discussed. I want to go back to what Dr. Brahmi started talking about, the struggle in speaking up for title or even for other subjects.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised being taught that we have to pick the battles that we want.
Sure.
So I completely understand that when you mention your example that in that moment you didn't decide to speak up. So my question is, when is the moment that we should speak up?
Yeah.
And how should we do that? Alone, in partnership? How can we decide on the course of action strategy that we want to pursue?
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question. And there's not a clear-cut answer. There's so many different factors that inform you, right? Your body sensations, what are you feeling? Is your heart thumping? Is your stomach tightening? Is your throat tightening, or tears starting? So your body sensations can help inform your decision. Who else is involved? Are these are the other individuals involved? Are these people who you have a long-term relationship with, or you believe you are going to have a long-term relationship with? Are these people or individuals that you see this one time, and the likelihood is that it's, you know, your paths will not cross again? So I think the degree or the depth of the relationship also helps to inform. And then I also think that sometimes, I know for myself, sometimes I just get to the point where, okay, I'm just tired of this problem or this issue or this reoccurrence, and I need to say something so it doesn't continue to reoccur. So for me, there have been times where my tolerance has reached the end of the finish line, and therefore now choose to take an action or speak up. So those are, and just off the top of my head, those are 3 things to take into consideration. And it's going to be different for every person and every situation. And then your question about, well, how do you speak up? How do you say something? And it's going to vary from after the fact, pulling someone aside and saying, this is the experience I had. This is the observation I made. This is the impact it's had on me. Talking to somebody privately. It might be that you say it in front of the whole group. Maybe this is a group that gets a mastermind, or a group that gets together regularly and they work on things as a group. Therefore, speaking up in the group is appropriate and healthy and effective, rather than having an offline conversation with a single member of the group. You know, thinking about this is a system, and to honor that system and me being a part of the system, it's better that I say something to the whole system, to the whole group. It could be and I know this is very true for me. I often need to kind of catch my breath and sleep on it, maybe sleep on it for a whole week sometimes or longer, but I need time to digest what just happened. How do I feel about it? Look at my own behaviors, look at my own thought patterns, check my own assumptions, and talk to the person or the group later. So I know that is often something that especially if it's a tender moment for me, that I need time to regroup, or a moment that really stung or really affected my feelings and brought out perhaps anger, that taking time first, I find is really helpful for me. And then for me, this is my own natural part of who I am, humor. It doesn't always work for everybody, but taking a humor or maybe a bit of a lighter approach, again, not always effective given the situation, given the intensity or the seriousness of the situation, and not always, you know, humor or lightness just doesn't always match with a person's natural personality. So I'm speaking, you know, only for me. And then I think as a woman, going back to that idea of that tightrope, of finding that balance of how do I speak up in a way that is clear and that can be heard, and finding the words, finding the tone that where that tightrope of being able to be clear and be heard, and for it to be received at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And those tips are very valuable. Also, one thing that I have impression is depending on how we speak, and that's why my question, sometimes we kind of harm our the way people look at us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that was my question, because I always struggle thinking about, should I speak up right now? Should I speak up in private? And this kind of thing. And I believe that this is something that a lot of women also struggle thinking about that. So thank you for that.
Yes. Yeah, that is a common struggle, common question. Yeah.
So it's interesting. You mentioned humor. HBR just put out an article not a few days ago about the implications on women in humor. So the article was indicating that women that use humor, we always hear, use humor. Humor is a valuable tool. In fact, I use it in my classrooms, sometimes intentionally, most of the time not. It's just, I tell stories and it gets funny.
Sure.
But according to the HBR article, one of the things that they were saying is women get measured differently when they use humor, whether it's in a meeting or in any environment. Men are perceived as more approachable, lighthearted, more, just overall more friendly, but still competent, still knowledgeable, right? Whereas women are perceived as less than if you use humor, where they're viewed as less prepared, less intelligent, like they're using humor to cover a deficiency of some sort. And it doesn't matter who the receiver is. It could be women and men. We still perceive the presenter in the same light, with that dichotomy that exists. Now, the article says you shouldn't not use humor. Instead, you should change the biases. And one of the things I tell my students is you'd retain more, right? When you're in a positive space, when you're laughing, when you're engaging, you're going to retain more. I tell students, okay, I'm going to make you uncomfortable. We talk about leadership. I'm going to make you uncomfortable because I want you to have a different perspective. And we have these differing conversations. But I find that when things are light, when people are laughing, there's more acceptance of both myself as a faculty and the content. But now I'm wondering if it's just the content and not the faculty. Right?
Right.
But it's fascinating because we don't, or we do, contextualize so much of this information. We try to approach it authentically, and sometimes it isn't received the way it's intending. Yes. So do you have any feedback for our listeners, for the panel in the room, as to how to handle some of them?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm so intrigued by this article that you mentioned, and now I'm going to go read it. And it also makes me think another article about the tightrope that women have to walk, right? Can I be humorous? Can I not be humorous? If I'm humorous, how does it come across? It's like, okay, now another tightrope to balance on. And then like you, I think my humor comes out just more naturally, spontaneously, right? And not planned. Oh, but goodness. So you've given me so much to think of. My head is swirling a little bit here with more information and more things to discover. So your question about any tips of how to approach situations where you want to speak up,
or just the tightrope. I mean,
tightrope, yeah.
Because so case in point, I have multiple courses this term. 2 out of my 3 courses that are the same course were very receptive to the humor. Like there was laughter, they engaged, they picked up on it, they started participating. And then I have one group that's a little bit more reserved, a little bit more quiet. And it was almost like, okay, I can't joke with them.
Yeah.
Like I just can't joke with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that dynamic, that tightrope, as you call it, how do you navigate that while still being authentically you?
Sure. Absolutely. Yes. And I think, and I love how you included being authentically you. I think that is at the heart and center of our interactions with other people, and our interactions with ourselves, being authentic to ourselves, as well as being authentic with other people. I think part of it is reading that room and being authentically light or humorous or storytelling with one group, and being authentically more perhaps serious, a little more subdued, a little more factual, if you will. And I imagine, as I'm describing these, both would be authentic for you. And so I think the authenticity, as a person, we are so complex, and our authenticity shows up in different ways depending upon the situation, the audience, the group. I know that how I am authentically, say, with my friends, I can be equally authentic, but the behaviors are different, say, when I'm in a serious situation, but I'm still authentic. But how I behave maybe looks different, but both are still authentic to who I am. And I think that takes self-reflection and reading the audience and being able to adjust in the moment with how the audience or the other individual responds to you.
Thank you. I have one last question. I know we're just about out of time, but I don't want to lose sight of this. So in organizations where you're the only woman at the top, with a sea of men, how do you navigate the elements in your book?
Oh, sure. Yes. So that it is definitely more difficult for a woman who's at the top and she's the only one. Or she doesn't even have to be at the top. She can be anywhere in the organization if she's the only one. That is just a difficult journey to be on day in and day out. So what I would suggest is find a couple things. One is find a friend outside the organization. Bounce the ideas off of her, share your struggles, share your challenges, share your ideas of, I have this upcoming meeting and here's how I think I'm going to handle it. Or there's this person in the organization and we kind of butt heads, or we don't communicate as clearly as we could. Let me talk, can we talk about it? And can I hear the ideas that you have? So find someone outside your organization. It could be a colleague. It could be somebody in a professional association that you belong to. It could be somebody in your graduate program. Maybe you're getting your doctorate degree or any kind of a degree. It could be somebody through school that you rely on. I also think inside organizations, even look at the men in the organization and look for those men that you have a good relationship with, that you trust, that you have rapport, that you see that they naturally perhaps already engage, try to include you in meetings and try to include your voice in meetings. Maybe they notice when you get interrupted or when your idea gets sidelined and they bring the conversation back to you. So look at the men in your organization and approach one of the men in the organization and share your experience and talk with him about being that champion, or how he could support you, or how he could help you navigate any landmines or areas of uncertainty or experiences that are difficult.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, panel committee colleagues. Clearly I've been wearing too many hats. Any additional questions before we close here? No? All righty. Well, Dr. Backstrom, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you. And thank you all for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's session, please remember to click the subscribe button. Have a wonderful Tuesday and a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.